Jeanne de Clisson, also known as the Lioness of Brittany, was a remarkable French noblewoman turned pirate in the 14th century. Her life, full of tragedy, vengeance, and fierce independence, unfolded against the backdrop of the tumultuous 100 Years' War between England and France. Jeanne's journey, from a loyal wife and mother to a feared pirate captain on the high seas, is a tale of both personal vendetta and the fierce spirit of a woman who defied the conventions of her time. Here's a detailed summary of her life and legacy. Early life and marriage. Jeanne-Louise de Belleville was born around 1300 into a noble family in the province of Brittany, France. Her family had roots in Breton nobility and owned vast estates, which granted her a privileged upbringing. In 1312, at 12 years old, Jeanne married her first husband, the 19-year-old Geoffrey de Chateaubriand, a nobleman with whom she had 2 children. This marriage was arranged, as was customary for noble families of the time, with the purpose of fortifying alliances between families. Geoffrey passed away a few years later, in 1326, leaving Jeanne a young widow. In 1328, Jeanne married Guy de Penthièvre of the House of Penthièvre, widower of Joan of Avaugour and second son of the Duke of Brittany. The marriage was not long, as relatives of a ducal family, in particular from the de Blois family, forwarded a complaint to the bishops of Vannes and Rennes to protect their heritage. An investigation proceeded on February 10, 1330, leading to the marriage being annulled by Pope John XXII. Though the exact reasons appear to be unclear, presumably they did this to control the lines of succession among these families. They viewed Jeanne's marriage to Guy de Penthièvre as detrimental, and the de Blois family had apparently great influence upon the Pope. In 1330, she married her third husband, Olivier de Clisson, a wealthy and influential Breton nobleman. He owned a castle at Clisson, a manor house in Nantes, lands in Blain. Jeanne and Olivier had 5 children together, and by all accounts, shared a happy life. Olivier was a loyal supporter of the French king and engaged in battles on his behalf. Tragedy and betrayal. The stability of Jeanne's life was shattered when her husband was accused of treason. During the 100 Years' War and the Breton War of Succession, loyalty was often fluid among the nobility, who switched alliances based on political expediency. In 1342, Olivier de Clisson had been captured by the English and released for a surprisingly low ransom, which led to suspicions in the French court. The French king, Philip VI, questioned Olivier's loyalty, suspecting him of colluding with the English. In 1343, Olivier was summoned to Paris on false pretenses of attending a tournament in safety, but was then arrested and a trial ensued. Jeanne tried in vain to have Olivier set free. She tried to bribe a king's sergeant to secretly allow his escape. Jeanne was therefore summoned to answer charges of disobedience and rebellion against the king. Jeanne ignored the summons and sheltered in Brittany, her stronghold. On August 2nd, 1343, after being found guilty of treason, Olivier de Clisson was subsequently executed by beheading. His head was put on a pike in Nantes. Jeanne was devastated. Her husband's execution, which she saw as unjust and politically motivated, marked a turning point in her life. The brutal display of Olivier's severed head on the gates of Nantes fueled her desire for revenge. In a period when noblewomen were expected to uphold family honor passively, Jeanne did the opposite. She took justice into her own hands. Jeanne de Clisson's vengeance. Jeanne swore to avenge her husband by waging war against the French crown. She sold her lands and used the money to finance a force of 400 loyal men. She attacked and massacred the entire garrison at Tufu. She also attacked a garrison at Château Thébault. She then converted a fleet of 3 merchant ships for war to take on the French forces at sea. This decision to take up arms was unheard of for a woman of her status, as piracy was typically seen as a man's endeavor. She recruited loyal men who shared her hatred of the French monarchy and began a career of piracy that would cement her legacy. Operating out of Brittany's coast, Jeanne's fleet targeted French ships. She became notorious for her merciless approach. She would often kill the crews of captured French vessels, but would leave a few survivors to spread tales of her wrath. She gained the moniker Lioness of Brittany, a title that struck fear in the hearts of her enemies. Her most famous ship, the flagship named My Revenge, was painted black with crimson sails, became a dreaded sight in the English Channel. Jeanne's choice to focus her attacks on French vessels specifically was a reflection of her personal vendetta against the French crown. She spared English ships and at times collaborated with English forces, particularly in the fight against Philip VI. Her methods were ruthless, a direct response to the mercilessness she felt the French had shown her and her family. The Lioness of Brittany on the high seas. Jeanne's piracy was not merely opportunistic. It was a calculated campaign of terror directed at the French. Jeanne is cited as a privateer of the English, which meant she operated under certain legal protections and obligations. No letters patent or royal letter of protection is known to exist from the English crown, however. In 1346, during the Crécy campaign in northern France, Jeanne used her ships to supply the English forces. Her attacks disrupted French supply lines and struck at the financial and military resources that were vital to the crown's war effort. This was a strategic move, as the 100 Years' War strained both the English and French economies, making every ship and cargo crucial. Jeanne's knowledge of the coastline and local support allowed her to evade capture for years, much to the frustration of the French Navy. Yet, as the tides changed, the French managed to intersect her fleet and sink her mighty flagship. In a harrowing episode, Jeanne and her 2 sons survived, but were set adrift for 5 days. Unfortunately, her son Guillaume died of exposure. Jeanne and Olivier were rescued and taken to Morlaix by her supporters. Incredibly, Jeanne continued her piracy in the English Channel against France for another 13 years. Though often romanticized, Jeanne's life as a pirate was grueling and filled with constant danger. Sailing the English Channel was perilous, and Jeanne's crew faced storms, battles, and the threat of capture. As a woman leading a fleet, Jeanne also had to contend with societal prejudices, though her reputation for cruelty and ferocity may have offset some of the bias against her. Later years and legacy. After years of piratical campaigns, Jeanne eventually settled in England under the protection of King Edward III, who likely appreciated her contributions against France. She retired from her life of piracy, remarried, and spent her final years away from the sea. Her later life remains shrouded in mystery as records of her activities became scarce. The war eventually came to a halt. Jeanne, and with help of Edward III, she was compensated the barony of La Roche-Moisson in Brittany. She is believed to have passed away around 1359, possibly in Brittany. Jeanne de Clisson's story stands out in the annals of piracy and medieval history. She defied the expectations placed on women, using her wealth, influence, and resilience to challenge one of the most powerful institutions of her time. Her life speaks to the personal agency she seized, carving a path of vengeance in an era when women had few avenues for power. Jeanne's legacy in modern times. Today, Jeanne de Clisson is remembered as one of the few documented female pirates of the Middle Ages. Her story has been the inspiration for various novels, plays, and popular culture depictions, highlighting her as a symbol of vengeance, strength, and autonomy. Jeanne's legacy endures not only as an emblem of defiance against tyranny, but also as an early example of a woman who took control of her fate in a deeply patriarchal society. Jeanne's life exemplifies how personal loss and societal injustice can drive individuals to extraordinary actions. As the Lioness of Brittany, Jeanne's piracy was not merely for wealth or fame, but a way to reclaim her family's honor and defy the monarchy she blamed for her husband's death. Her story continues to fascinate because it is both an extraordinary tale of revenge and a testament to the fierce willpower of a woman who refused to be subdued by her circumstances.